Hey everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes to file in and we'll get started shortly.
All right, we'll get back.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and cut the music. Hello everyone, welcome to Cassandra Lunch number 100. Oh man, what's that now? 2 years, almost 2 years of Cassandra Lunches. We started uploading videos around Cassandra Lunch number 10. So we have at minimum, including today's, 90 Cassandra Lunches available to the public on our YouTube channel. That's crazy. Thank you everyone for following along with us on this journey, and we hope to see you continue along with us as well. Today's topic is going to be on Cassandra, where it fits into your product or platform. Today's guest speaker is going to be Rahul, CEO, also architect here at Anant. And we're going to cover what companies currently use Cassandra, what products use it as their backend, and we'll also take a look at how far Cassandra has come, in addition of like other players like Scylla, Yugabyte, how they've brought value to the Cassandra ecosystem, as well as how Saas and managed services providers also can help out in terms of where Cassandra can fit for you. So current organizers for the event are Rahul and myself. We are looking for guest speakers. So if you're interested in giving a talk at Cassandra Lunch or Data Engineers Lunch, feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed below. We're also looking for sponsors. So if you're interested, you can also reach out to me as well. We're a part of Data Community DC. Data Community DC believes in building an inclusive environment. So no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, everyone is welcome. And we expect the respect to be given to all. Data Community DC has built up a bunch of different organizations. Our sister lunch, Data Engineers Lunch, falls under the umbrella of Data Wranglers DC. So if you're interested in all the various events, organizations, you can find out more at datacommunitydc.org. So what do we cover here at Cassandra Lunch? We cover everything that is Cassandra, talks Cassandra, or plays well with Cassandra in the ecosystem. So we cover open source enterprise like Datastax, compliant like Scylla, Yugabyte, Cosmos, Keyspaces, etc., as well as open source managed options, as well as enterprise managed options ranging from Avon, Instacluster, Astra, etc. And then as well as tools in the ecosystem that play well with Cassandra, like Cassandra or Spark, Kafka, Airflow, etc. So if you are interested in learning something about Cassandra, any tools you've played with Cassandra, and you want to give a talk here at Cassandra Lunch, feel free to reach out to me. If anyone's new, say hi, hello in the YouTube chat. Group rules, if you have a question, ask it. This is meant to be community, so please do share any questions or concerns you have, and obviously, please be polite and courteous to others. The guest speaker may have preferences and when they prefer questions, so they'll cover those when they take over. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data and analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So Cassandra is our bread and butter. Datastax is a partner and a sponsor. We also have GW University, which helps provide venue space when we have in-person events. We also have some institutional organizational sponsors. If anyone is looking for a job or is offering jobs, or if they have any meetups, hackathons, conferences that they would like to promote, feel free to drop links and we'll get them promoted out. Datastax Astra currently has their build-a-thon ongoing. It's towards the middle end of the last month of challenges. So it might be a little late to join, but see if you have some time, if you want to make it. There's cash and swag prizes to be won for each individual monthly challenge, as well as if you qualify for the demo day, there's cash and swag prizes to be won there as well. We are hiring full-time and part-time positions, data platform operators, engineers, or architects. You can find out more at careers.anant.us. Again, we have data engineers lunches at Mondays, and we have an upcoming talk from a guest speaker from Transform. She'll discuss their company as well as their recently metric flow product as well. And we also have Cassandra Lunch next week. Again, as mentioned, all these videos are available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/noncarp. So don't forget to like and subscribe so that we can keep up to date. In case you miss a live event, you can always watch the live recording. Cassandra.Link should be your number one resource for all things Cassandra. We're ongoing a revamp of the site, so we're looking forward to what the community thinks. So please check it out. Give us feedback. If you want to see certain features on Cassandra.Link, let us know. And then also, we've recently released our second public runbook. This specific runbook is on 3 common Cassandra data operations. This runbook will go offline over the weekend, so this is your last chance to get it the next couple of days. Or you can get our third runbook, which we'll be releasing next week. I'll drop the link below. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass it to our speaker for today, Rahul.
Hey, thanks, Arpan. Appreciate you getting us started off. Hopefully the lighting is a little bit better. I am traveling this week. Actually, I've been traveling for a little while and don't have much control over my immediate surroundings. Yeah, so today I'm really excited, obviously, because it's episode number 100. We've come a really long way. And the other thing is the topic today is also very exciting to me, because, you know, I love to see other people using Apache Cassandra and telling other people about it, because apart from, you know, our or my word or our company's word or somebody else, you know, who would say that they're an expert, apart from all those people recommending Cassandra, the next best thing is to see successful brands and products using it and seeing how they use it. And that's really what excites me. I actually learned a few more products that I didn't know that use Cassandra at the core of what they do. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you can see. Okay, hold on. There we go. Okay.
Yep.
Screen share is working.
Excellent. All right. And let's see if Google decides to work for me. Okay, good, it does. All right. And by the way, today's audience, even though you know, I'm saying it's for product managers and CTOs, it really is for everybody, non-technical people, technical people, project managers, product managers. But the way I'm going to cover the topic is that if you're starting a new product or creating a new platform, or maybe you're thinking about your current platform and figuring out how to scale it, you know, how would you potentially use it? And seeing how, let's say, a commercial consumer brand, or seeing how a software, open source software product or a commercial software product, how they are using it, it may inspire you to look into Cassandra also. This is one of my most favorite quotes. I often rephrase it, but I don't even know if Bill Gates said this, but the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. Or what I would say is, add technology to a bad process, it'll make it worse. Add technology to a good process, it'll make it better. And why did I bring this up? Well, adding Cassandra to a bad product won't make it better. Just because you're using Cassandra doesn't necessarily make the product amazing, doesn't necessarily make it scale. There are a lot of components that go into making software scale and be a good product. And obviously Cassandra is just a layer. It's a component actually of a layer we would say is the data layer, or the data services layer. This is Cassandra history in one slide. I thought about, getting the little timeline together and showing everybody how we've come, far we've come in Cassandra. But there's other presentations that we've done on that topic, and there's plenty of other resources that you can Google. But basically, I look at the history of Cassandra as ancestors in theory, as in where the ideas for Cassandra came from. Apache Cassandra as it is, in the sense that this is the Java code base. And then there is the Cassandra compliant systems, whether they are built in C++ or they are a software as a service, but they're not Cassandra code bases. They're inspired by Cassandra. And these are generally linear, except at this point, Cassandra continues to evolve, and these other products continue to talk with the community, as in they monitor what Cassandra is adding to the stack, and sometimes they will take features in a new version of Cassandra and they'll backport it into their product line as well. Google Bigtable is the grandfather of all columnar key value big data databases. The open source equivalent of that is HBase. And Google Bigtable, we can subscribe to it, but it was created to keep the data for Google's index, or at least parts of the index, at least in the processing. And in HBase world, you have to run Hadoop and a bunch of different things to get to use HBase. So Amazon, in fact, the CTO of AWS wrote a paper called Dynamo, and DynamoDB is the implementation of the Dynamo white paper. And he basically talks about Dynamo as a way to create a database that can easily scale, that has very few moving components, and it doesn't necessarily need too many other components to run a masterless system, the ability to have regional replication. And then Facebook took that paper while Amazon was going and making the DynamoDB database to power its AWS metadata. They made Cassandra, and that was Cassandra like 0. whatever. And there was actually a Cassandra white paper from Facebook. You can read it. It's interesting. Most of it is still really good to read. There's a bit of it where they use Zookeeper. There's no Zookeeper in Apache Cassandra anymore. But that code base was given to the community, and a bunch of people started to use it, and it became a serious tool. And then people at Rackspace, which used to be a hosting company, now they're more like a managed hosting company, meaning they do services on top of other clouds. They were one of the biggest hosting companies, well, name recognition at least, for managed hosting. And they needed a way to track their information for their systems, the metrics, the metadata for their servers. And so people at Rackspace started to improve Cassandra and iterate it to their needs. And a group of people at Rackspace left and created Riptano. Riptano was the predecessor of Datastax. And I don't know how many people from Riptano are still at Datastax, but the core group that maintained Cassandra for a long time were people at Datastax. And so Cassandra and Datastax have had a colorful history. There was a point where Datastax left the open source community. At that time, other companies that were involved in using Cassandra, like Netflix, Apple, IBM. There's a bunch of different companies that use Cassandra. They kept contributing. Datastax contributed a little bit, but they had a kind of a arm's length relationship. And then recently they've come back into the Cassandra community with good involvement and full force and a lot of great contributions. InstaCluster is another company that's provided a lot of improvements and guidance and leadership to the project. And so I want to give them credit. Now, beyond the Java code base is basically two classifications of inspired products. One classification, I would say, are technologies, or Cassandra compliant technologies that you can run on your own infrastructure. Whether or not it's commercial, it doesn't matter, right? So Scylla DB and Yugabyte, both are technologies you can install on your own infrastructure, similar to how you can install Cassandra on your own infrastructure, or you can do it on the cloud or whatever, right? There's no restriction. And the other classification are services that are compliant with Cassandra, but you cannot install on your own systems. So Microsoft Cosmos or Cosmos DB, it has a CQL compliant layer, and AWS managed key spaces. They actually have it in brackets for Cassandra. They used to call it managed Cassandra, but I think you can't do that. And Yugabyte, just a simple tangent here, it actually supports PostgreSQL and CQL. It also has Redis support, which not a lot of people use, but it's in that kind of hybrid NoSQL and new SQL, meaning distributed relational databases. So Cassandra went from 1.0 to 2.0, and at that point, the technology changed from a schema-less technology where you could just add records or objects and it would create a schema like a document store almost, and it would just manage all that internally as key value. And it went from when we went from 1 to 2 and later versions, Cassandra added schemas that were similar to SQL. We had tables with columns and column types, and you could insert, update, read, delete using CQL, whereas before then, you could only use what's called a thrift protocol. Okay, a lot of people, when they think about Cassandra, they think about thrift protocol and the original Cassandra, which did not have CQL. So when we interview people, we said, "Do you know Cassandra?" "Oh yeah, I know Cassandra." Like, okay, so then I start talking to them and realize that they really are talking about HBase. They know HBase, but they think they know Cassandra. It's not the same thing, right? So there was a big change between the original ideas from the ancestors in theory to what Cassandra is today. And, you know, essentially, if people are using Cassandra well, it's because they're using the newer features, not the older features. The older features are still there. They're kind of like infrastructural, but from a user perspective, from a developer perspective, Cassandra's improved the operations, the engineering, meaning how to talk to Cassandra from a developer perspective. The architecture is a lot easier. And in general, what Cassandra community comes up with, a lot of these other folks also tend to, I don't want to say copy, they assimilate those ideas into what they're doing. Cassandra in product. So as I mentioned in the beginning, you know, we're talking about a few different you know, products or platforms out there. There are lots of them. I'm not going to go through every one of them. But you know, this is a sample of, you know, what I've seen personally. And I couldn't fit more in there. And I know of many more, but it's confidential, either in our company or our partnership with Scylla and with Datastax, that they're confidential in this, and we have some conversations with Yugabyte as well. You know, they're confidential because people don't necessarily like talking about what their stack is built on, because they're not like Netflix. Netflix has an engineering block, right? Spotify has an engineering block. Not every company is like that. They don't want to show off. I want to make a clear distinction that if you see, you know, there's a divide here between what we say is consumer or commercial consumer technology, which is a brand that you would interact with as a consumer, and with commercial enterprise software or open source software. Note that I don't really have too many examples of SaaS or platform as a service based on Cassandra that a consumer would use, like a professional consumer would use. Although all of these technology companies have some cloud version. And the reason they choose Cassandra is because it operates the same, whether you run it in your cloud or it's running in their cloud, right? But I don't necessarily have an example for like a software company like, I don't know, Basecamp that's using Cassandra. It may be, I don't know, but I need to do a little bit more research. So why did I get into Cassandra? Why does anybody get into Cassandra? One of the reasons is they hear that some other company is using it and it might be useful. And that's what this whole video is about, is to show somebody who doesn't know about Cassandra where it's being used. Datastax does a good job of doing case studies. You know, the Apache website has a pretty good blog now, again, maintained by help of Datastax. But what I want to cover is a few different angles, right? So Uber's early design, and I think they still use, at least from my review, a combination of different databases. But in the beginning, they used MySQL and they used Cassandra together. And over time, they started to make their own MySQL variant called schemaless to deal with their schemaless data. And then they use Cassandra still for their long-term storage. There's another example for Uber I'll show later as it relates to an open source software that they have open sourced, that they were building on top of Cassandra and they've open sourced. As you can see, I mean, this is actually a very high level diagram of the Uber's platform, right? The driver side and the rider side and what they do. There's essentially you know, an API layer that these you know, users can interact with, and all that data essentially gets put back into Cassandra. The other you know, viewpoint that I'm going to show you later on is the Cadence software, and that's going to zoom into very specific area of the platform. So Uber, well-known user of not only Cassandra but also Kafka, as you can see here. They also use Spark, tremendous amount of Spark. They use Hadoop as well. Here's Spark right here. So it's not like a company uses Cassandra and says, well, to the hell with everything else. That's not the way it works. You don't do that. There's a reason why you need Cassandra. And I've said it before, Cassandra is the last station on the train track for companies of this size. Like, you don't use Cassandra because you want to use it to be cool. You use Cassandra because you have to use it. There's nothing else that will do what it does. Netflix, another case study in Cassandra. They use it in a few different places, as you can see. It's part of, you know, users adding data, assets, meaning like videos. And then the recommendation system, it uses Cassandra as well. And lo and behold, no surprise here, they're also using Spark and Kafka, alongside with MySQL, Redis, Elasticsearch, Hadoop, you name it, they're using it. And Netflix and Uber both have good engineering blogs. They tend to open source a lot of their work. Netflix has given a lot of open source technologies that have related to Cassandra in the past. Walmart, you know, folks wouldn't necessarily think Walmart is a, you know, sexy Silicon Valley company, you know, but Walmart is doing great things in the e-commerce world. They had acquired Jet.com. That's how they do the delivery, right? They compete with Amazon because they bought this food delivery or whatever convenience store delivery company called Jet. And more than that, you can order things and pick them up at Walmart. A lot of retail companies, they needed to do that. Walmart was prepared during the pandemic. And part of the reason was because they could scale to all of their stores, providing people with real-time interactions on their applications, meaning their mobile apps, their websites. There's a couple of resources when we published the blog post, which show how Walmart made an object store with Cassandra, as well as using it for just generally dealing with their inventory or operations of their e-commerce. Spotify, a lot of the work at Spotify that The Last Pickle has done for Spotify was open sourced. So there's Spotify Medusa and Spotify Reaper, which became TLP's Cassandra Reaper and Cassandra Medusa, are open source repair and open source backup and restoration tools for Cassandra that make it easier. And that came out of Spotify using Cassandra. They use it for, obviously, the storage of information, but they use it for the recommendation or personalization engine as well. And I could go on and on. There's, Starbucks uses it. And the reason I'm not showing those is that, companies that have implemented Cassandra or Scylla or Datastax, they have great case studies. So if you go to ScyllaDB or Yugabyte or Datastax, they have great case studies on how they've implemented it at their customers. Shifting to commercial enterprise products, and most of these actually, I think you can use it on premise as well. And the reason is because it uses Cassandra. So Apigee is an API gateway. It also has what's called a backend as a service, and there's an open source version of that available called Apache User Grid. So if you want to know how this is built, this part right here, and actually look into the code, but it's not, at least one version of it, I don't think they're contributing anymore, but that technology stack is available. I've looked into this deeply, and it's a pretty cool product, although it's using the old Thrift protocol, and I don't think it's been updated to use CQL. And then they have their API and management gateway for their APIs. They use other databases, but the majority of the speed layer is in Cassandra. Kong is another API gateway. They have been using Cassandra for their metadata to store the API, API endpoint, everything relating to an API gateway, such as authorization, security, and documentation. And recently they said that they're deprecating Cassandra because they're going to a file-based system. So their excuse was that they're going towards schema-less, and that Cassandra, enforces a schema. I don't buy it, because we'd done a project a while ago where we were storing a very schema-less configuration into Cassandra using sets and collections, and maybe we'll do a talk on that. We were using files to create the configs, but then to replicate it across the cluster, we were using Cassandra. Well, now, if you're using Kubernetes and you save that same information to a Kubernetes secret, then that is made available to your whole namespace or your whole cluster, and that's where everybody is going. So they're right in one sense that they don't need Cassandra anymore to, distribute the metadata. But at the same time, I just think they're bullshitting. I think part of Kong is open source, so you can also take a look at how they're using it. Pega, it's actually one of our clients. They have a product that runs on Cassandra, and this is their on-premise product. And, if you are curious, you can check out how to install their product and see how their architecture is. In fact, this is the diagram here. The Pega platform runs separately, and then there's a Cassandra cluster that you can talk to. The older version had everything embedded, but they realized that people want to be able to use their own Cassandra cluster, or outsource the hosting to another company, and that's where they separated it out. I took this screenshot because it says this content applies only to on-premise and client-managed environments. Well, obviously, if you're going to buy Pega's software from Pega's software as a service offering, you don't have to configure the Cassandra cluster. But there's an insight there, and the insight is the company Pega likely is not making two versions of their software. One version being what runs on-premise or in a client-managed cloud environment, and one that runs on a Pega-managed cloud environment. I mean, there will be some differences, but if you can make one software that can be used in both, then why wouldn't you? And so Cassandra allows you to do that. You can make software that will scale as a software as a service infinitely for multiple companies and users and tenants. And at the same time, because you're using Cassandra, and it's because Cassandra is open source, and because Cassandra can be installed on-premise or in your own client-managed cloud environment, you can tell customers, sure, you want to have your own environment with this software? Great. Here's how you do it. You can use these components. Now, in the past, the database layer would have been, and many times is still, databases like Oracle or SQL Server. But really, for really large software and critical business software, it was Oracle. And what I've seen is that companies are shifting from Oracle to Cassandra for massive data storage, and maybe Postgres for the transactional side of things. So all the resources, as I said, they will be given when we publish the blog post on this. Here's another API management software. You see a pattern here. People need to store a lot of data, and they need to keep it up and running. And API gateways, what they do is they will take a request, they will route it to the API, they will get the data back, and they need to keep that data somewhere. So the next time you ask for it, maybe it doesn't need to do it again. So sometimes that's why Cassandra is used. Other times, it's just there are so many things that are happening in the system, and it grows so big that how many views or how many usage, how many times is the API being used, right? Who's authenticating? How often are they authenticating? How much data is getting, piped for one customer versus another customer when they're using an API? The metrics around the API, all that data needs to be saved somewhere in a persistent, secure data store. And putting it in Elasticsearch, we can have a conversation about why that isn't permanent. But generally speaking, Cassandra is a good place to put that information. IBM actually has, I found two products that they use Cassandra inside. One is their operations analytics predictive insights. It's a handful. A lot of their products are a handful. Where it takes data from various systems, including like New Relic, Splunk, their own metric systems, and it can detect when there is about to be a fault, basically, right? So in this case, and I have a few screenshots from a PDF that I found, but basically it noticed right here that something was happening, and it alerted it. And it does this because it sees it from past performance, but it learns. Well, that data, to make this thing run and to give folks a way to access that data, it's done using Cassandra as the backend to their API. IBM Sterling, and actually a component of that called Global Mailbox, which is used in a few different places, that uses Cassandra to store data. So, shifting from something like, let's say, Pega or a Kong API gateway to something like a B2B integrator or a global mailbox, these type of software, mom and pop that have an e-commerce store on Shopify, they're not going to use this, right? That's not for them. Right? It's for companies that have different regions, global regions that have to be in sync across the world. So when you're thinking about Cassandra in your product, the first question is, will your product be used by people around the world? And if the answer is no, it'll only be used by people around the country, well, that's probably still good too. The other question is it going to be something that has to be up all the time and cannot go down? Because if it goes down, people are going to get hurt, or people are going to get sick, or money's going to be lost. And if it goes down and it's okay, then you probably don't need Cassandra. So all of the software that we're seeing here, these are enterprise-grade commercial products, and they made a decision to use Cassandra because it meets a few of those checkbox items, right? Redundancy, resiliency, speed. There were a few other products. I decided not to go into them. There's one called 3DS Katia, which is it's a company. Dassault Systems is an airplane manufacturing design software company, and they have a subdivision or department that does 3D stuff. And 3DS Katia is actually a tool to create a system to test systems for resiliency. It's a mouthful, but you can go look into that. There's a CRM software called Genesis that uses Cassandra in the back end. Nutanix, which is a hardware company, but they have a cloud management component that uses Cassandra. You can find, if you just go to Google and look for documentation, set up Cassandra or install Cassandra, you will find a bunch of software where their documentation says, to set up our software, you need to install Cassandra. Okay, so if you want to go look for more, that's how you do it. Cassandra and open source enterprise products. There are no open source products that use Cassandra that are for just me. It's for businesses. So databases is one category, which I showed earlier. Cortex, we've covered in the past, is a Prometheus compliant data store that can scale, and it can store data in Dynamo, Bigtable, or Cassandra. And you can basically store infinite amount of data because your Cassandra cluster can continue to get bigger in using the Prometheus compliant layer. You can Google that or go to YouTube and look for our talk on Cortex and Prometheus. What would I get out of this? If you want to build a tool or a system that's going to collect a lot of time series information and you need to do some visualization on it, you should go look at this software. I wouldn't actually remake it. The Cortex plus Grafana pretty much will do what you need, but take a look at how they do it. Open Time Series Database is one of the earlier time series databases. And again, they're generally made with an adapter, so it can use HBase or Cassandra. Red Hat, they have a component as part of their other components in their middleware team called Hocular, and allows people to store data, do alerting. Again, it's very similar to some of the stuff that we looked at earlier. OpenNMS, network management service, our system, it has a time series database based on Cassandra. So time series, time series, time series, time series. But then there are software for workflow management. We talked about Cadence before. There's a deeper talk on it. You can go to YouTube and check it out. But this was actually made at Uber. So Uber is using Cassandra in other parts of their business, but they're also using it here in managing the kind of the workflow of things happening. And it's not just Uber, there's also Uber Eats, right? There's a lot of different systems at Uber. And it's interesting to see how they made this software to meet their need. And then after they open sourced it, DoorDash, which is a competitor to Uber Eats, they started to use it also. And it uses Cassandra. Temporal was a fork from Cadence. And you can see that, and it's very similar to Cadence, but you can see that a lot of these other companies are using Temporal, like Snap, Datadog, we already checked out Netflix, Airbyte. We actually are looking at Airbyte as a technology. It's really cool. And that's how we've basically understood software at these large companies, is that it's not just these companies are using Cassandra. They're sometimes using a software that is then using Cassandra. And that just adds more street credibility as to why, if you want to make software that's similar to that, why you should look at using it. And just as there were API gateways, Kong and definitely Kong has an open source implementation. There are other API layers that are different from API gateways, but it's worth talking about. One is the Dynamo adapter by Datastax. So Dynamo has a REST API. And so if you want to have a Dynamo REST API that is backed by Cassandra or Datastax, you can install this adapter and basically move from AWS. If you were using DynamoDB on AWS, you want to move away from DynamoDB, you can use the Dynamo adapter by Datastax and have it run on top of Cassandra or Datastax. And I didn't mention here, but Scylla DB has a built-in layer that's Dynamo compliant. Stargate is an open source project. It provides CQL. Well, that comes with Cassandra, so that doesn't make really any difference. REST via JSON, GraphQL via JSON, and then recently gRPC, which is generic remote procedure call. And this is the same software that is running Datastax Astra, their Datastax's database as a service product. Of course, if you're running it, you're going to have to do some more work, but why reinvent the wheel, right? If you want to use Cassandra to store your data, might as well use Stargate because it's already built for you. Or just use Datastax Astra, right? Like, what the heck? And then this one is an early open source project, which I followed for a while. But Wikimedia Foundation, which is the foundation that runs Wikipedia and actually has the open source media wiki software, the Wikipedia infrastructure heavily uses Cassandra. So you can look up the architecture, but this is a zoomed in section of the overall Wikipedia or Wikimedia architecture. They have a thing inside, they call it REST-based. And what REST-based does is provide a tabular storage mechanism, not unlike Stargate or Dynamo. In fact, it says this is similar to Dynamo. And it was there well before the Dynamo adapter for Cassandra and well before Stargate. So this is an early tool that is still being maintained. But what Wikipedia does is actually, when you run Wikipedia at scale for millions and billions of users, it's not the same media wiki open source software that you install on your own computer with PHP and MySQL. Okay, it has way more components to make it work. But in very simple terms, what happens with what you host on your computer versus what happens on the real Wikipedia.com is when you're adding content to your local or your private instance of MediaWiki, it saves data in PHP it saves data in MySQL via PHP, and it when you go to the web page, it gets it from MySQL via PHP and it shows it to you. And there's some REST APIs now, so it's not just all. It's getting to be more, like a modern stack. Well, when you're going to a Wikipedia page, that API that was used to render that page from the MySQL compliant database, the next time somebody comes and they access that page, it calls a REST API to get that data. Well, that REST call is then cached in Cassandra. It's saved in Cassandra because then, if I went to it and 10 other people went to it in the same minute, the MySQL system may or may not be able to handle it, but because it's in Cassandra and it can handle a lot of reads, it's saved once and read a lot of times. So it's a way to store data and retrieve it if you just use it as REST base. But inside Wikipedia, it's actually used as a caching system. I learned about this recently, although there was a talk on it last year at the Apache conference. And Automatico is a similar service to a similar software to Cadence and Temporal. But when I watched the video, I definitely saw some other use cases. But essentially, they have ways to quickly create APIs or workflows that are wrapped in an API or a function, serverless function, to handle a few different operations. And when you create your software, it automatically takes care of creating the table inside Cassandra to store that data. So it's neat in that you don't even have to interact with Cassandra directly. You just make software that is a workflow, and Automatico will persist that data behind the scenes in Cassandra. And different than Cadence or Temporal, you can actually look at that data in Cassandra. Like it looks like a table that a user could read from. That's it. Actually, we have a few minutes, but there will be a resources section added to the slide. I highly encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube, which you're watching, and our blog. And we'll send you a notification when the blog post is ready with all of the stuff that you'll be looking for. And with that, I will stop sharing, and I'll take some questions. Okay, Arpan, any questions?
Yeah, so one, I guess, a lot of the examples that you had given, it may have just been what you chose was easy, what had diagrams and stuff. But is there a reason to use like Cassandra over, well, for let's say for the aspect of comparison. So if it's like, if we have a use case of like the last example that it's more for like caching data versus like something where we're storing time series data that we then do stuff on top of that. Would it make more sense to use something open source, or would it make more sense to use or integrate with like a managed option?
Let me reiterate the question so that I know that I got it. If there's a particular use case of Cassandra, does it make sense to just use an existing as a service or a commercial product, or use open source Cassandra? Is that the question?
Yeah, then kind of an extension to that. So if you're working with one of these open source enterprise solutions, would it make sense for you to maybe configure it to then push it to a managed service?
I see. Okay, sure. Yeah, and I actually, I know I put that in the summary that I was going to talk about other places that you can use Cassandra without running it yourself. And I just mentioned, Astra, but there's plenty of different places where you can use Cassandra, but not have to run it. And some of them are actually Cassandra. Some of them are not Cassandra, like Scylla DB or Yugabyte, and they have their cloud offerings. And then there's Amazon AWS managed key spaces, Cosmos DB, which are not Cassandra, but they're compliant with Cassandra. So if it's, this is my distinction, okay? These hosting services like managed key spaces and Cosmos, if you have a ton of information, it's going to get really expensive. And if you have a ton of reads and writes, it's going to get really, really expensive. So you have to basically look at the opportunity cost of, in the next 6 months or a year, how much data am I going to have to store, and how many times will people look at that information? And if you're doing things like collecting time series data, or you have a cache that's going to be written into and read a lot of times, that's a volume of data that probably doesn't make sense to put into one of these, Cosmos or managed key spaces. Maybe it's good to get something up and running just to try it out, okay? So then you take a look at the costs for running, either Scylla Cloud or Yugabyte Cloud or Astra, and you see, okay, will this do it? And generally, they're going to be a little bit more cost efficient than managed key spaces or Cosmos, okay? And here's why. Cosmos is a global database. That's what they say they are. End of story. It's replicated globally. Dynamo allows you to have regional replication out of the box, right? These other systems, you can choose which regions to put stuff into. That's why it's not as expensive, right? It's not, and I think they're eventually going to give you options to add more and more regions. But the least expensive, and I have to do a comparison recently, is going to be services like Ivan or Instacluster that essentially all they do is vanilla Cassandra hosting, and you can choose the machine type, okay? So there's cost always as a factor, and still, at some point, you're going to have so much data that having that cost structure given to you from the outside isn't going to work. So you have to manage it, or you have to have somebody manage it for you in your own private cloud, or for cost reasons, you go back to on-premise, because hardware on the cloud is expensive. So if you're storing petabytes of data in Cassandra, which you shouldn't, unless you can afford it, you probably wouldn't be putting petabytes of data into Cassandra if you have something like S3 or HDFS available to archive it. But let's say you have petabytes of data and you know it's going to be read and written to all day, every day by a lot of users. At that point, you may just have to host on-premise and manage your own data center. And that's a whole different ballgame. So there's all these options from the cloud to the cloud native offerings by Amazon and Microsoft, to these software companies that are providing a database as a service, to these companies that are providing Cassandra managed by them on their private clouds, to something that is client managed or in the client environment managed by somebody else. So our company, Anant, provides, first of all, the consulting on which one to use. We can help customer with all of those. But ultimately, if the customer ends up in a scenario where they want to do it on their premise or in their virtual private cloud, we would help them set up that environment and get it to be as close to something like Instacluster or Ivan, not quite, like, let's say, Astra, because they're optimizing it on Kubernetes. We still tend to help people with data on VMs and software on Kubernetes. And these challenges are the same across the industries. So whether it's like a bank or a healthcare company or an e-commerce company, the decisions for what to do with data, they're the same. It always comes down to cost. The use cases, caching versus Time series doesn't really matter. It's all about how much money do you have to spend. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't see any from YouTube. So
Okay.
if anyone has any more questions here, feel free to speak up.
All right. And maybe we can stop the recording and I have a few more things for the team.